I think we have to start off with your most famous line.
Yes, the most famous line being speedy delivery.
Oh, it's
If
actually happening.
If I had a nickel or a penny for each time I've said that over the last 50 years, I would, when sitting here, I'd be in the Bahamas now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Real History. I am your host, Jared Frederick, and we're sitting here in the magnificent galleries of the Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh. And in this episode, we are going to be taking a look at 2019's biopic entitled A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And for this episode, I think we have one of the best guests that we've ever had here on Real History, and that is Mr. David Newell, who is better known on the show as
Mr. McFeely, speedy delivery.
I can't believe it. I can't believe we're actually having this conversation. It's so great to have you here.
Well, thank you.
And I'm really looking forward to gaining your insights, not only on how the film mirrors reality, but also some of your very personal and profound recollections of working with Fred Rogers for so many decades.
I'll be glad to do it. I can only say right now that it was not work. You know, there's that saying, when you're looking for a career or a job, find something that you love, because you'll never work a day in your life. And that's how I never worked a day in my life working with Fred.
Well said. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started and take a look at A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine?
How did Tom Hanks deliver on the performance here?
He delivered well. You know, just as we were watching the opening, I thought we were watching our program. And then there's Tom Hanks. But he said one of the hardest things he had to do in all the movies he's made was to come in, sing that song, put the sweater on, and zip all at the same time.
Yeah.
And he said that was one of the hardest things. I think they did it over 13 times or something like that. But you know, you look at this and you squint and it looks like Fred Rogers, doesn't it? And I think Tom Hanks was the perfect choice in a Hollywood actor, because he has the same ideals as Fred does. And he's one of the most respected actors in Hollywood.
America's dad, as some people call him. Yep.
And Fred Rogers is almost the same way, America's dad.
His name is Lloyd Vogel.
Lloyd Vogel. Now that actor is Matthew Rhys, and he plays the reporter author in the film.
Semi-based on the experiences of journalist Tom Janot.
Yes, Tom, that's right. He is the Tom Janot character. And Tom Janot wrote this wonderful essay or article for Esquire magazine. It had Fred on the cover. It was one of the best I've ever read. And I think that Esquire magazine inspired this movie eventually. TriStar Pictures.
And I absolutely love the fact that they recreated the models for the movie, and they added some real life fixtures in it. Here we see Pittsburgh coming up on the horizon. And I believe they filmed these sequences with the actual WQED cameras, or the ones very similar to the originals.
They did, and I think if they didn't actually use them, they brought the cameras in so it'd be accurate to the cameras we used when we were taping Mr. Rogers. But this is now a trip to New York City, and I remember going down to the production or where they make the scenery, and they had this model. I mean, it looks wonderful, but it wasn't that big. But the day that I visited. I visited a couple days, but they were working on the models. I think this was filmed in the William Penn Hotel ballroom. William Penn Hotel is in Pittsburgh, a grand old turn of the century hotel, and this is the ballroom. And that's where they filmed this scene. And of course, they're all extras.
Right. Well, as we've seen here in Pittsburgh over the past decade in particular, Pittsburgh has stood in for a lot of other big cities
Yes.
because it's cheaper to film here.
Yes, that's true.
And you can capture the big city aesthetic
Yes.
without going to New York City or Boston.
Pittsburgh's going to catch on pretty soon.
Yes.
But that's true.
Yeah.
That it's. But sometimes film crews go to Canada because it's cheaper there too. I don't know if you know the program, The Americans.
Oh, I love the Americans, yes.
And
Yeah.
Matthews and
yes.
his wife, his real life
Yes.
wife, stars. They're,
Correct.
Both of them are
Yes.
lovely people, and I love The Americans.
Yes.
That was one program that it would be my destination program.
Well, you're a man of good taste. What can we say?
Well, thank you. I have to be working with Mr. Rogers.
Touché. As we're getting introduced to some of our characters, perhaps you'd like to tell our viewers, how did you become Mr. McFeely? What was the process? How did you get the job and get incorporated into all that work?
Well, let me see. In the summer of 1967, before you were born,
Yes.
I was in London visiting my cousin, and it was $5 a day to travel. It wasn't that expensive. At any rate, I was there for about 2 months, got a telegram at the American Express office. That's where you pick no cell phones. And the telegram said that a mutual friend of Fred Rogers and mine, Fred Rogers is taking Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood national. And I, my friend, gave Fred my name to be interviewed to be on the staff. And I said, great. And I came back and met with Fred. And he didn't mention the program or much, or didn't tell me what the job was exactly. We talked for an hour. And he was asking about traveling. Where were you? How'd you like London? Da, da, da. And at the end of the hour, he said, when can you start? That was Fred. He was finding out who I was, not by going over all the resumes and so forth. And he said, and after he said, when can you start? And I said, well, here are the scripts. He said, oh, by the way, I've written in a delivery man in this series of shows, and I want you to play him. And his name is Mr. McCurdy. That was my first name. And McCurdy was the president of Sears Roebuck's Foundation. And Fred was saying, thank you. Well, the first day of taping, I was in my costume and ready to go, and the phone rang for Fred in the control room, and it was Mr. McCurdy calling. And he said, we love what you're doing, and good luck on your first day, et cetera, but could you please not call the delivery man McCurdy?
Okay.
They probably thought I was too close for comfort or whatever. At any rate, Fred came back in the studio and said, oh, we have to get you a name. We're starting taping in 20 minutes. He said, before he got that out, he said, McFeely. That's who you are, Mr. McFeely. So here I am.
And tell our viewers, for those that might not be familiar, where does McFeely come from?
Well, Fred McFeely Rogers McFeely is his mother's maiden name, and her father was the real Mr. McFeely. And so it was a tribute to his family, too. And I think it came up because McCurdy, MC, McFeely, I think that's how it came up. At any rate, had Sears not called, I'd be sitting here and you'd be calling me Mr. McCurdy. But that's how I got into the program. And I thought I had a job for 1 year.
Wow.
And here I am.
And here you are.
Watching, this is 50 years later, watching the story of how it all began. Now, this scene that I know of never happened in real life, but it's something they've added to give some, I think they gave a little tension between the father and son.
Well, on our car ride over here, we had a very interesting discussion about casting relating to this film. And I love Chris Cooper, and he's a phenomenal actor.
Oh, he is.
But do you know what would have been really interesting?
Who?
If they had casted Michael Keaton to play him as a tribute to his roots on The Neighborhood.
It would have, except is Michael the same? He's not quite as, is fatherly looking, though. He still looks like a leading man in a way.
That's true. Although makeup could have done it, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
But Chris Cooper's a wonderful
Oh,
man.
absolutely.
He is so kind, and you can go up to him and talk to. He is wonderful. He was really one of the best actors in the film, and he's done so much
What a
over the
range.
years. But he lives in Boston. And I went up and introduced myself and said, I really like your films that you've been in. And I never thought I'd meet him, but here he
How
is.
wonderful.
But he's so at ease. You know, he's such a good actor. And he's got a swagger here that he doesn't really have in real life. You know, I think they had to have the tension between the father and son.
It works very well as a cinematic device
Yes.
that carries the narrative.
Yes, but you'll see a scene coming up here shortly. Now, of course, that never happened.
The punch at the wedding. Yeah.
Oh boy! Here's a scene that Fred would not have liked, but it works.
Yes, very much so.
Oh, I see. That's interesting. I forgot about that device.
Have you ever felt the way Lloyd does?
You'll notice the collar and the clip by the tie. Fred had shirts like that. He loved I don't know what they call those, a collar clip, whatever they are. He wore a lot of those.
There was always something you can do with the mad that you feel.
And I think Tom Hanks at some point said it was difficult for him to speak so slowly. Because Fred is his pace is very deliberate. But you know, that's good for children.
Someone is at my door. Let's go see who it is.
They can take
Absorb
it in.
every word.
It was directly to them.
It's Mr. McFeely.
Well, look who it
Here.
is at the door.
Speedy delivery. Now that's not really me. That actor's name is Daniel Krell, and that hat is not mine. I think they had that costume was made for Daniel, and I don't know where it is now, but I know that some of the pieces of scenery were given to WQED, the public station here in Pittsburgh.
Well, this is the first time on Real History where we've had a guest see themselves portrayed in film.
Yes.
How do you think of his interpretation of you?
He looks a little like me, and I think he's a little frantic, and I was too. And as the years went on, I became less frantic and Fred did that purposely. Oh, he has all the moves that I did. Mike, I forgot about this. There we go. And Fred always wanted to use a piece of art, a famous piece of art, so children would just see it. You know, he didn't really say this is the sunset or by so-and-so. And these how-to films were one of the most favorite parts of the program.
Yeah, and I can certainly recall watching my fair share of them when I was growing up as well. There was one where I believe he went to the Penn State Creamery and he showed
right.
how ice cream was made.
Yes.
And that one really resonated with me because I went to the creamery as a child.
Oh, I was with
him. These
him.
were so great.
You hired me as an investigative journalist. I don't do puff pieces.
Wait a second. Didn't I hire you to do whatever I tell you to do? And right now, that's doing a profile on one of our nation's heroes.
He says he doesn't do puff pieces, and Tom Janot didn't do puff pieces. He was a very serious writer, and I think that's what happened when he was assigned. He came a little skeptical, I think, and he remained one of Fred's best friends.
I think this could help you, Lloyd. Just start to change your image.
I don't need to change my image.
And all these conversations about changing image. And the film so cleverly uses cinematography and color and transitions and integration and whatnot. Our good friend Corey just reminded me that Mr. Rogers was in fact colorblind.
He was.
As well. but how did that play into his sense of production design and wardrobing and whatnot?
Well, a wardrobe was picked for him. They would tell whatever tie he brought in wore that day from home, a red or a plaid, they would pull out the sweater that went with that. And so his sweaters and shirts and were all choreographed for him. But he couldn't. There are several degrees of color blindness. There's a very, you can't tell any colors. He had sort of the mid-range. He could tell a yellow chair or a bright red sweater. He could tell that.
Look, I messed this up. I just want to talk to you. We have a lot that needs to be said.
No.
So much of this movie, I'd say the main theme is relationship, relationships. Fred was, of course, very sick as a child as he was growing up, and he had to use his imagination in his room because he was bedridden. What sort of relationship did he have with his family when he was growing up, and how did that nurture him into the man that he ultimately became?
He had a very close relationship with all of his family, very close to his mother and father and his sister. And that's interesting because his sister, when Fred was 10 years old, his sister came into the family. She was adopted. And you see some historical pictures of Fred interacting with her, teaching her piano and playing with her. And I think that was an inspiration. I think Lainey was her name. Elaine Crozier was her married name. And I think that was Fred's introduction to childhood and interpreting that for children. And he was also, as you said earlier, there was a time during that when he was growing up, there was influenza going around. I think he was in a room that he had to stay for the whole summer. They were afraid he'd get sick. But he was very close to his family. He was the only child for 10 years, and then came Lainey, and that changed a lot, I think, in his life. And I'm sure it was the inspiration for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And somebody once asked him, I can't remember the exact question, but something like studying, what did you do to prepare for being Mr. Rogers? And he said, being a child.
Yeah.
And he did. He took what he went through as a child and put it on paper and then finally on screen.
The need to instill empathy.
Yes,
in others.
that's exactly, and of all people whose empathy, he had empathy galore. He was quite a man. But a lot of people know all of his seriousness and his all of the works and books and TV programs that he made. But there's one thing that people didn't know. It was his sense of humor. He had a wonderful sense of humor, and I would leave messages on his sofa, and he'd get the biggest kick out of them. I've kept all of those now. This actor is playing
Am I in the wrong place?
Bill Eisler, who was
I
our
know who you are.
company manager for years. He's since retired, but that actor is to be Bill Eisler, showing Matthew the set. And there it is. That set, I walked in there. That is a recreation that they did.
On the same soundstage.
On the same soundstage, yes. It's a WQED. Now, there may be some elements that were part of ours, but basically they recreated it. I walked in, and I thought, my goodness, they brought the set back from the warehouse. But that picture hanging in the back, that long picture, I think it has
with the trolleys.
Yes, that was there. That they used. That was ours, and they used that in the. And I think maybe the curtains are new too. They're not our curtains. The rug may be ours, and the coffee table is the one we used.
And it's worthwhile to mention, too, that a lot of these original artifacts and set pieces are now on display right here
Yes.
at the Heinz History Center. So you can come and see these firsthand. It's really cool.
It's set up, and there's a mannequin of Fred. Is that what you call it, a mannequin, I guess? Sitting, tying his shoe. And there's also Mr. McFeely's bike is here, too. And the tree and the castle, and some of the puppets are here on the 4th floor. So if anybody watching this wants to see the original Mr. Rogers set, the Heinz History Center is the place to go.
Absolutely.
And I bet you are very strong on the inside, too.
And we had this a lot. A lot of people would come in, want to come in and watch the show. If wouldn't have gotten anything done. But occasionally there would be people who'd write in and say how much the program meant, and our child is physically disabled. Could we bring him in? We're going to be in Pittsburgh. And if we could do it, we would do it. Oh, did you ever see the outtake of this?
I have seen this.
And this,
Lord.
and Fred did this.
Lord.
Hold, please.
Would stop mid-take to
Yeah,
go say hi to somebody.
Yeah, he would, and the director would say, "Oh no, don't let him do that. He'll be."
But the part with the tent or the teepee there, that did in fact happen. We'll try to find the original footage and incorporate that here.
Oh my goodness, the slate is even the same.
And action.
Do you know what this is? It's a tent. Let's set it up.
And I've always been fond about his failed attempt here to put up the tent, because what he demonstrates to kids is it's okay to fail.
Yes.
But you try again.
And adults make mistakes.
Yeah.
No one's perfect, he's saying. But it's the persistence.
Yeah.
I think Tom Hanks is having a hard time doing it. I forgot about this. Okay, now here it goes. This is what, I don't know if...
It must take 2 grown-ups to set up a tent.
And after each scene that Fred would tape, openings, closings, he would do this, go over to the monitor and watch it. And it was like he was watching another person. It was Fred standing there watching an actor.
Wow.
That was my interpretation.
How long have you been married, Lloyd?
Looking back on Mr. Rogers in hindsight, I'm struck by the broad range of subject matter and also cultural commentary that he was able to cover, because oftentimes he never explicitly discussed it, but he would talk about racism, he talked about assassination, he talked about divorce, he talked about death, but he did it in such an approachable and digestible way. What sort of process did he go through to try to present this cohesively to young people?
He has a strong background in child development, but he had a advisor. Her name was Dr. Margaret McFarland. And every Tuesday, Fred would have ideas for scripts, and he would talk over with her from a child development standpoint. And she would say, maybe not that, but do it this way. A young child wouldn't understand that, but this way. And I'm trying to think. Oh, and they would talk about some very serious things, divorce. And no one ever, the reason we did divorce is that the mail came in and said, Mr. Rogers, is there any way that you can talk about divorce on your program, because it's happening to our family and so many different families? And that's a touchy subject. It took him about 5 years before he attempted it, but he did. And then we got some letters, you do get letters, and some said, our children never thought of it, now they think we're getting divorced. So then you have to answer that letter. But I think overall it was helpful. And he would do it, as you said, he would do it on a level that a 3, 4, 5-year-old can understand. And he did some with puppets too, in the neighborhood of make-believe. Oh, but one time I remember being in a taxi with Fred, and I was reading the newspaper. We were going somewhere, and I read a little article about a little boy, maybe 8 years old, put a towel around his neck and jumped off the garage, thinking he could fly like Superman, and was injured. And I said, Fred, you know, is there a way we can interpret these sort of mythical images so a child would understand? And he said, so we tried to get Superman, and that we couldn't get the clearance, but we got the Incredible Hulk. Because my daughter, when she was 3 years old, turned the TV on, and there was the Incredible Hulk, and it gave her nightmares. And so we did the Incredible Hulk and to interpret scary images for young children.
And then there's the great stuff with Margaret Hamilton,
Oh, yes.
Wicked Witch of the West, which is just a delight.
Well, she is such a wonderful person. And I said, somebody once told me, you know, they showed Wizard of Oz, they're still showing it on national television. And somebody said, you know, I'm an adult now. That witch still scares me. Scared me when I was little, still scares me. And I said to Fred, do you think that we could ever do something about scary images, talking about witches and so forth? And Margaret, he said, if you can get and locate Margaret Hamilton, I'll write the script. And I located her.
That's so great, so wonderful.
And she was delightful. Oh, it looks like Betty from a distance.
It sure does.
Where did that bad smell come from?
Betty Aberlin was so good with the puppets. I think she was such an asset to the program. No one could talk to the puppets of all of the cast members, I don't think, as well as Betty could relate. Because when she and Fred would have little scenes with Daniel, they were wonderful. And I think Fred would write scripts knowing that Betty could handle the subject.
What do you do with the mad that you feel when you feel so mad you could bite?
And this song that she's singing right now came directly from the lips of a child at a daycare center. Wow. And he asked Mr. Rogers went to visit, and this child was upset, and he said, Mr. Rogers, what can you do with the mad that you feel when you feel so mad you could bite? That came right out of a child. Wow. And Fred took those words and put it into a song. And I think it's one of his best songs. You know, you don't hit someone when you're mad, you talk it through, and it's a great lesson. I wish it would apply to countries too. Boy, does that look like Fred.
And not only does he capture the essence of Mr. Rogers, but also the characters. Like,
yes.
He gets the voices of the puppets so well.
Well, he's such a good actor. Oh, this is...
These little vignettes are so wonderfully well done, where they...
Is that really...
They put Tom Hanks in the real footage on Arsenio Hall and Oprah. And
oh, is that what happened?
Yeah.
They didn't recreate that.
I don't think so. I think that's the actual footage.
I was there for that. That was done, I remember...
Oh, wow.
I was there that day. That was my other job, that I was in charge of the puppet relations. So I would set up different interviews for him, and we just happened to be in Los Angeles when they wanted him to be on the show. And I said, Fred, he never liked interviews. That was something, he didn't like talking about himself.
Huh. So this is now a very famous interview.
Oh, it is.
And you were there for it.
Yes.
Did you feel that Fred was at times, was he like a fish out of water? Were you fearful that he wasn't going to blend in with this sort of like late night crowd? Were you worried about how he was going to
Yes,
interact?
I was, and I wasn't. I thought the first time he did anything was The Tonight Show. And they called and they wanted him on The Tonight Show. And everybody said, don't do that. Don't do that. And it worked. And I thought, there is a whole audience out there that needs to know that Mr. Rogers is just not a kiddie show, that he's got this depth of material that he's conveying to children on television. And what better place than The Tonight Show to get that a different audience?
What do you think is the biggest
him on
mistakes
Oprah.
parents make in raising their children?
not to remember their own childhood.
Oh boy, I was there when he did Oprah too. That was right before Oprah went national. It was in Chicago, and she was about ready to explode onto the scene.
Yeah.
But you know, the day that they taped the Oprah sequence in the studio in Chicago, they thought, "Oh, Mr. Rogers, it was a holiday too. So we'll bring children in and put them down in the front." And Fred said, "You know, okay, but if children say something to me, I'm going to pay attention to them, and you may not get your interview."
Yeah.
He would not ignore the children. And there's a few that spoke, but generally speaking, they sat there and listened.
Is this Andrea?
Yes?
Mr. Rogers knows my name.
You left without getting to say goodbye.
He would do this too.
So I'm glad we get to continue to
I've
talk.
seen him do it.
Going to New York City today to film.
And as our friend Corey has often told me, he would call people on their birthdays.
Yes.
And sing to them in the various voices of the puppet characters.
He did.
Yeah.
He had a little pocket notebook, date book, I guess, about like the size of a checkbook. And he had this wonderful writing. He put everybody's birthday down that he knew, and would call them. I got the calls.
We stole Bill from the governor's office 14 years ago.
Love Bill, big fan.
That's supposed to be Fred's wife.
He is very protective of Raj.
You call him Raj?
We don't call him Mr. Rogers at home, dear.
That's one of the best lines in the movie, I think.
Oh, she was quite something. She had a wonderful sense of humor too. They both had great senses of humor.
Mm-hmm. You feel that this representation accurately captures her as well?
It does. She doesn't look that much like Joanne, but her attitude and her spunk is like Joanne. And very friendly and very upbeat all the time. That all happened.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine?
I think his reaction, boy, this program really has permeated the culture.
Mm-hmm. Was he ever uncomfortable in situations like this? Did he ever think, why am I worthy of this public recognition?
I think in certain ways, yeah. He never enjoyed the in front of camera. He never enjoyed. Oh, that's. He never liked the television star aspect. That's where he was uncomfortable.
Okay.
What he loved was creating the program, writing the scripts, and especially creating the music. That's what he loved that. And I think he thought being on camera was a necessary evil for him. But no one else could do it like he did it. That was Fred Rogers that you saw. His wife always said when people would ask her about what's Fred like at home, and she said, what you see is what you get. And it's true.
Do you ever talk to anyone about the burden you carry?
Again, this is talking about taking some frustrations out on the piano.
Yeah. And at the beginning of the documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, which is a wonderful companion piece to this, you see some footage of him in the early 1960s where he talks about modulation and stanzas and voices and tone and whatnot. So there's so many, even though it may not have happened in the chronological order that we see it, there's hardly a scene in this movie, as far as I can tell, that isn't rooted in reality.
Oh,
to some extent.
you're absolutely right. The only thing that was, they've added the tension between the father.
Correct, yes.
And that could have been, I don't know, but I don't think it was. But it was added to the movie to give some, I think it needed attention.
Yes, definitely.
Didn't you have a special friend when you were very young, Lord?
He's asking if he had a stuffed animal as a child. And that's what Fred would do. He would get to know someone like that, starting with their childhood. It was, and he pulled you in to a conversation to find out more about you, and that's a very good reaction from his part as an actor. He's not quite sure.
He doesn't want to open up yet.
No, he doesn't.
That she did. She died when I was young.
I forgot how good this movie is, and that's what Fred would do. He would wait.
Close his eyes and meditate almost.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Dad, I am King Friday the 13th.
And there was a question that was a tough question to answer. So Fred sometimes would answer it through the puppet.
Mm-hmm.
And he was clever that way too. Okay, this is getting a little too, I don't want to answer that question. So, and this is my interpretation, but he then would pick the puppet up and talk through the puppet.
Have you met Daniel?
Not officially,
I
no.
forgot how good this movie is. It's and the close-ups are wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
And the editing of the movie. And I would be sometimes with him when he would be showing puppets like this. We were on an airplane once. It was a long flight, and people were coming up to him, and we were in the first row before first class. There's a big space. And Fred brought the puppets out and would show them to, there were some soldiers going somewhere.
Oh, wow.
And they remembered the program, and he brought them all out. And Matthew Rhys, they're both playing it very intimately, very, very, it's not overdone. It's just very natural.
Did you work out your disagreement?
This is ridiculous.
Well, Lloyd, where are you going?
We're done. Thanks. It's been a real pleasure.
Now, I don't know if that happened in real life, but there may have been a version of it somewhere.
Do you think anything like that ever happened where people caught off guard by the fact that there really was no difference between the character and the real man?
Yes, I think they were. The interviewers especially, I was in charge of getting the interviewers set up, and sometimes they'd come in person, and they'd come out afterwards and say, that's the real thing, right? They were surprised. And another one came out one time. He was in there an hour interviewing Fred about an article or something, and he came out and said, I need another hour. He interviewed me. And he would find out about them. It wasn't a diversion on his part. He was really interested in finding out who this person was.
Sign the paperwork, pack up the house, put her in the ground.
Jerry?
Come on, Lloyd.
Oh, Jack! Oh, God! I'll call 911. Lloyd, do something! He's giving me a heart attack. Lloyd, do something!
Now, I don't know if this happened in Tom Janot's family or not. I think this is all for the film.
I think otherwise they just would have had him be the character.
Yes, yes. It gives dimension to the person who's interviewing Fred.
Yeah.
That's why the article is so good.
There were 3 defining characters that helped shape my worldview as I was growing up and I was watching PBS, and the first of which was Mr. Rogers, of course. The other was Bob Ross.
Oh, yeah.
Who's the artistic equivalent, I think, of
yes,
Mr.
he's getting
Rogers.
a revival now, too.
Very much so. And Ken Burns.
Oh, yes. Oh, my.
And that's like the PBS trifecta of this golden age of educational television.
You remember Lloyd.
Fred, I don't understand what's
forget
going
about
on.
a lot of this.
Can we stop?
I really enjoy these scenes here.
Yeah.
It's almost like a Twilight Zone episode
Yes.
where he can't differentiate fact from fiction. So it's so effective.
We're much more real without the lock.
It's good to talk.
This is one thing that Fred never did. He never came out in the neighborhood to make believe.
Oh yeah, that's a great point.
But this is a surreal little from Lloyd's point of view.
Yeah, I really like it.
when you talk about a movie relating to Mr. Rogers, you wouldn't expect this. This movie has more in it than you would expect something about Mr. Rogers, I think.
I would argue that the show itself was like that too.
Yeah, I guess
you,
you're right.
You could look at it at a superficial level and just say, oh, it's just a kid's show. But as we discussed earlier, it gets to these profound issues of life, living, and death, and so much more.
That's how I always describe it. People think it's a nice little kiddie show, and of course it is that. But it has such depth, and it's got a soul, I think.
Yeah. And our friend Corey can be seen walking in the background here too.
I think we just saw him.
Yeah.
He helped you become what you are.
What was it like being on set with Tom Hanks portraying the person who was so dear to you?
Yeah.
These two iconic people merged into one.
It was. That's a good question, and I would run with it. There's Fred. At some point, I would think Fred was with us. He did such a good job.
We'll just take a minute and think about all the people who loved us into being.
Well, there's Margie Whitmer. That's Joanne Rogers.
Yep.
And I think, and that's Bill Eisner's wife, Marty. That is Bill Eisner, who was the company president at one time.
And there you are.
There we are thinking of. The
people who mean the most to
yes.
you. Yeah. And of course, this moment is based off of his famous acceptance farewell at the Emmys.
Yes, yes.
One of his final public addresses.
Yes, it was one of his best.
Yeah.
Think of the people who, and it showed people, the stars in the audience wiping tears away.
It's such a moment, an iconic moment in television history for sure.
Fred would do that too. He would look down like that, and he would sit in a booth like that. It's almost like I'm seeing Fred, but yet I know I'm not.
Oh, what a special moment that must have been for you to be on set that day.
It was.
I know you're trying to apologize, but that doesn't mean it gets to be easy.
Yeah, it really is. This Matthew Rhys Lloyd's story, Tom Janot's story, I think.
Well, I think where this movie succeeds, where a lot of biopics fail, if we think about Ridley Scott's recent Napoleon movie, one of the criticisms of that is that there's just too much in it. You can't put a whole life in even a 3-hour movie.
No.
The smarter thing to do is like what Steven Spielberg did with Lincoln, where you pick one episode or one chapter of a famous person's life, and you can really...
You can build on that.
Yes, and I think to an extent that's what this movie does too.
Yes, it does. And
it's over a few months rather than a few decades.
It's actually the opposite of what I want.
Oh, he does. They're such a good actor. Fred got up at 5 o'clock every day.
Wow.
And went and answered mail or did things he had to do personally. So he'd do that. Then about 6 o'clock he would go to the swimming pool, which is a athletic club near where he lived. Swim for an hour, just as this. That's what he'd do. I would see him often do this. And swim for an hour, and it would get him, this was his therapy in a way. Get out, shower, come to the studio, go to his office, look over the mail, then come down to the studio at 10 o'clock, and we would start rehearsing. That was a ritual for him. But if he didn't get his swim in the early morning, he said he'd be grouchy all day. It was like jogging for him. But it's one of the most healthy things you can do because it's use everything. It's swimming.
So with the episode where we actually see Mr. Rogers going swimming, our producer Andy just made a good point. That allows us to disprove some of the wild and outlandish urban legends
Yes.
about Mr. Rogers. What are some of these urban
Well,
legends?
one that he was a Navy SEAL. And I think that came from, we had a swimming sequence, and I think they saw the flippers on him, and I think that's where that started, I think. Another one was that he was a sniper in Vietnam, and he was not. He was not that. That was the last thing Fred would ever be.
And that he wore a sweater to cover up his military tattoos.
That's right. That's why he wore the sweater. That's not why he wore it. He would be the last person that would get a tattoo. A lot of people love tattoos, but Fred would not. That was not who he was.
We just had to get that out of there.
Yeah. But he would, on the other hand, say, if you have a tattoo, he would probably say, that's a beautiful tattoo. He wasn't anything negative. He just wouldn't do it.
Right.
Will you look at me? I am so sorry, son.
As Chris Cooper's begging for forgiveness, we have this rather cathartic moment.
Yeah,
it's, I think, the culmination of the movie. Do you know of any circumstances in which Fred actually helped mend relationships between family members or friends, and perhaps in a manner similar to this?
Not specifically, but I know of that he did that, and he would do a lot of it without anybody knowing. You know, he would probably do things on his own and I know he did some, but I don't know all the specifics, but I know that he was very involved with certain families when they were going through, one family was going through a divorce, and another was going through a loss of a parent that they were very close to, and Fred worked with them. He would go visit. He was incredible. He was on the board of the Children's Hospital. This is a good example, I think. And they'd have a board meeting. Instead of going home, he would be in the hospital because the board room was in the hospital. He would go down and visit the floors of the children, especially the children who could use the visit. Yeah. And I think his visit really helped not only the child, but the parents who were in the room. And I think it helped some of the children get better in some ways. But he would do things like that. He would never mention that. Never say it. But I've been with him a lot of times that he was in, and one time, he was in a room with a child, and I was sort of in the doorway, and the child was very ill. And the child said, "Can you pray for me, Mr. Rogers?" And he said, "Yes, but can you also pray for me?" And had the child, and that was such a different approach.
Powerful.
You'll have to read this.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I forgot all about this. And I have, now that magazine, those stacks were props. It was just jumble inside. Yeah. But the prop man gave me one. I have one.
Oh, that's great. That's a great souvenir.
And I wish I could have, it was after the fact, and I wish I could have had them sign it. Now, he would do this too.
Come on in.
Lloyd?
Take pies to people?
Yeah. Or something. You know.
Holy
Andrea,
Hi, Fred.
such a pleasure to finally see you.
Oh,
He did this once on my birthday, which is November 24th. And I had written an article for the local paper about theater and my love of theater. And it happened to be in the paper the day of my birthday. And he knocked on our door, had a necktie wrapped up in that article. and he stopped it off. That's who he was, and it was just not me. You know. And as you said earlier, anniversaries, he knew the anniversary and birthdays of everybody on the staff. He knew that. and we'll call people on their birthdays.
Death is something many of us are uncomfortable speaking about. And anything human is mentionable. Anything mentionable is manageable.
That's a classic quote. Anything that is mentionable is manageable. And when you think of it, it's true. And he took pictures all the time. He would take pictures when we were on trips of people who were with us. It's usually the other way around. They wanted to take a picture of him. He wanted to take pictures of them.
Of people he really didn't know.
Yeah.
For the most part.
But this is back in the day of film. And he would take the film, have it processed at the film camera shop, go pick them up, and if I happened to be in any of them or anyone in the office, it'd be on your desk. Now we're back to the neighborhood.
Back to the set.
You know, with all of the sadness that in the film, there was one advisor to Fred, psychologist, child psychologist. You know, he would do programs on divorce and sad things, and she said, that's all well and good, but don't forget the fun. You know, it all can't be there has to be fun too mixed in with it, all of that. And Fred, that got to him. He remembered that.
That's a nice picture. It gives me a good feeling to see them all together like that.
By the way, his mother made a lot of these sweaters for him that he used on the program. Did you know that?
I did not. And you have one of them. Yes?
I have one of them. I have one. He gave me one of the sweaters towards the end of the run. He said, I'm not going to use this again, and it doesn't look good on camera, but my mother made it, and you may have it. And I have it. My son knew that I had it, and for my birthday one year, he snuck it out of the house and had it framed for me, and I have it. Fred would do this.
There we have it.
Mary L. Heller is a wonderful director. She's also an actress too, and she's done a lot of work.
She did a superb job on this one.
Yes, she did.
How nostalgic do you get for the days on set when you watch this film or one's comparable to it?
This I'm watching a film. When I get nostalgic is more when I sort of think back. Something will trigger a thought, and I'll think, oh yes, we did that, and here's what we did, and we went to that. That's when I get nostalgic for the program, and I miss the camaraderie we all had on the set, because it was very close. It was a family in a way, and that's what I miss.
We've had so many great conversations throughout our watching of the film, and so many great insights that you've shared. If you are interested in some additional insights after this episode is over, we heartily recommend the documentary Speedy Delivery, which you are at the heart of.
Yes.
There's some great additional commentary to be found in this. And additionally, too, we heartily recommend The Good Neighbor, The Life and Work of Fred Rogers. This is by Maxwell King, and you can find that for purchase right here at the gift shop of the Heinz History Center and other fine booksellers. So if you're interested in learning more about the life and good deeds of Fred Rogers, you certainly can't go wrong with these resources. So there we have it. You took a look at the film. What are you most pleased with when you rewatch this film? Do you think it does this man justice?
It does. I think Tom Hanks gets the essence of Fred Rogers. You know, you're aware, I think, that it's Tom Hanks, but after a while you forget that, and he does a wonderful job. You know, before Tom Hanks began filming, he came to Pittsburgh about 3 months ahead, went to the St. Vincent's where the archives are, the Mr. Rogers archives, and spent a day going through the background on Fred. He did his homework.
Mm-hmm.
And I think and it was nominated, the picture was nominated for an Academy Award. Didn't get it, but it had a nomination.
It was certainly worthy of it. And before we head out, we'd like to convey special thanks not only to our friends here at the Heinz History Center. This is definitely a world-class museum that you should come visit. You can find the link for that museum in the video caption below. Special thanks to our good friend Corey Geishauser, dear mutual friend of ours for many years, who helped to facilitate this visit and this conversation, who himself was an intern on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
He's a good facilitator.
Absolutely, and much, much more. So thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
And before we leave, I'm going to say, speedy delivery.
All right. We'll see you next time on Real History.
Speedy delivery.